Let's Science is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
3, 2, 1.
We live in a universe of scientific wonders.
Every day, scientists are inching towards breakthroughs which can change our lives.
We're playing our small part in sharing these wonders with you.
That's why today is a fine day for science.
So let's science.
In Australia, we've had we've got a virus going around.
Pandemic, yep.
Yeah, we're locked down at the moment. We've had some crazy protests that have happened in the city where that haven't been so nice, and the footage that's gone around the world has made us look like some kind of dictatorship, which is not true, by the way. So had that. Now we've had an earthquake. I'm just waiting for the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. I'm just sitting waiting for that to happen now. All right.
Well, I went to Churchill Park the other day and I saw the 4 kangaroos of the apocalypse, so it's close enough.
Kangaroos of the apocalypse. Yeah, were they? Yep. But anyway, let's we experienced an earthquake recently. Didn't do a lot of damage, thankfully. But Caroline, tell us about this earthquake and about earthquakes in general.
Okay, so let's learn a little bit about earthquakes. So we did have quite an earth-shattering earthquake compared to what we usually have, which is hardly any earthquakes here in Melbourne. So on the 22nd of September, so it wasn't that long ago, at 9:15 a.m., Melbourne actually experienced a 5.8 magnitude earthquake. And then following that, about 18 minutes later, it was a magnitude 4. And the epicenter was northeast of Melbourne in Gippsland, around Mansfield, and it's only about 130 k's from where we are now, because I did my Google Maps just to see the distance, and it was at a depth of 12 kilometres, and I think that's why we felt it so strongly. This earthquake was actually far-reaching, and it was felt in Sydney, it was felt in Canberra, in Adelaide, and even in Tasmania. So,
wow, I forgot about that. Tassie.
Yes, they felt it down there as well.
Wow.
So it was quite unusual. I remember that I was just going upstairs to clean some kitty litter and all of a sudden I heard this rattling. I'm like, what's going on? And I just feel this shaking. I'm like, okay, I know what this is because I felt them in New Zealand before. And then I just grabbed one child, grabbed the other child, brought them close to me. I just thought, hang on, this is going on for a while. Actually went for a while. I don't know how long exactly, but it wasn't just a quick shake. It went on for several, I would say, tens of seconds.
Yeah, actually, Lino, in 5 seconds, tell us, what were you doing during the quake?
Yes, I was going to ask.
Yeah, I was at work, just at work at my receiving station, and a guy was on the forklift, the other guy was next to me, and we looked at the warehouse and was shaking. Now when we started shaking, I thought it was just the wind. Yeah, we have a strong wind, man. It goes really through through the warehouse. Well, that sounds sorry for the listeners for that. Anyway, and then all of a sudden, the whole ground just shook. The racks, if everyone in the warehouse knows, the racks was just shaking like this, going back and forth. I go, this is not a this is not a huge wind.
Goodness, in a warehouse, you wouldn't want any shaking, would you?
Oh no, because when the rack started shaking, we went, okay, we got to go. And there's this guy coming out, going, come on, out, and we were outside, so we just rushed outside, and it lasted for us almost a minute because we could still feel the aftershocks. Is that correct, Caroline? You still feel the aftershocks later. It was still going a little. Yeah. Yeah, and it was, and you can hear other people coming out from there, other warehousing and everything. It was really, really weird. Like I said at first, we're just standing there.
Yeah.
It's the wind. All of a sudden, no, this is not a wind.
Run.
Run, exactly, out. Get out of the way. Yep, that's it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Lindsay, what were you doing?
For the Santa, it was very simple. So, myself, my wife, my sons, we were all lying down in my bed. We were just having a chat, and then suddenly, and I think someone said, "Oh, that's a really loud truck." It was like, "That's not a truck. This is an earthquake." And yeah, it was like, and it was like, "Oh, this is going for a bit longer than normal."
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
it was a pretty strong shake. We felt it.
It
Even
was,
from lying on a comfy mattress in bed, we could feel the movement. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So it was a bit of a jolt. We all felt it. Everyone in Melbourne felt it for sure, because I was one of those people who went on Facebook and said, "Has anyone else felt it?"
So
and then I
many
saw
people.
this whole, just my whole feed was everybody.
Did anyone feel that?
Did anyone feel
Was
that?
that an
Oh, we had an
earthquake?
earthquake. Yeah, and then everybody was just going off. Yeah, it was crazy. There was actually, I think was it Chapel Street in Perrin, where there was a building where a wall had fallen down. It was an old building. And then there were people saying, stuff fell off their shelves, picture frames may have moved and stuff like that. So people had various experiences. Luckily, no one was injured.
Can I say, there were a lot of people filming, I don't know, coincidentally, because the Channel 7 News had maybe like 10 different people who'd filmed on their camera.
Yes.
The one that broke my heart the most, though, were there were these two children, and they got, Duplo blocks. They built this really tall line of Duplo blocks, and then it collapsed.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But you know what? The best thing, rather than you pushing over your Duplo blocks, is that if the earth shakes
And
it for
actually
you,
the
that's way
earthquake does it for
way
you.
more
Yeah.
exciting.
Do it
'Cause
again,
usually-
Earth. Do it again.
Yeah, usually my kids build it up and they knock it over, but it's like, no, the earth, wow.
Yeah.
Yes, it was an interesting day, because I think there were protests set for that morning in Melbourne, and everybody was kidding that, saying, "Oh, Dan Andrews, our premier, organised an earthquake to stop the protest."
Stay in your homes. I'm going to shake the earth.
The protests didn't stop. They happened later in the day. So luckily, those protesters were not in the city near any buildings,
Yes,
because it may have been a different story. But anyway, so that happened. And so I thought, let's talk a bit about earth science and why earthquakes happen. Okay, so we have to talk a little bit about the earth structure first. Okay, so I'm going a little deep, no pun intended.
Sorry, I took that as a pun, yeah.
So it's all to do with the structure of the earth. So the earth is made up of 4 layers. Okay, so it's made up of the inner core, the outer core, the mantle, and the crust. So starting with the inner core. The inner core is actually a solid metal sphere right in the middle of the earth. It's got a radius of about 1,220 kilometers, which by coincidence is about 3/4 the size of the moon. So it's quite large, and it's made up of iron, nickel, and is very dense. The outer core is also made out of nickel and iron, but it's in a liquid form. It sits between 5,180 and 2,880 kilometers below the surface. It's heated, so it's pretty hot. It's heated by radioactive decay of elements of uranium and thorium, and it really is churning all the time. It's got really quite turbulent currents, and this actually creates the Earth's magnetic field. Now, if you know a bit about that, as a side note, the Earth's magnetic field protects us from the solar flares and all the radiation coming from the sun. So that's just a little side note for you.
Wait. We still have to wear our sunscreen, people. Don't.
Yes. Some things do
Not
get
that protected,
through.
yeah.
Yes, some things get through. So then the next layer is the mantle, which probably most of us know about from volcanoes and things like that. It's the Earth's thickest layer, starting about 30 kilometers below the Earth's surface. It's made from iron, magnesium, and silicon. It is hot, and it's a semi-solid kind of material. It also circulates around, but it's a lot less. It's a lot slower than the outer core. At about 100 to 200 kilometers depth is where the mantle's temperature actually reaches the melting point of rock. It forms a layer called the Asthenosphere, and it's where geologists believe that the tectonic plates ride and slide across the Earth. The crust is next, and it's the thin uppermost layer, so that we're sitting on the Earth's crust ourselves. and it's cooler and it's more brittle compared to the layers below. It's mostly made up of, so the largest composition of elements are oxygen, silicon, aluminium, and obviously you do have other elements, but those are the majority. So the crust varies in thickness. Under oceans, it may only be about 5 kilometers thick, but under continents, it can be between 30 and 70 kilometers thick. And then the crust is divided up into these tectonic plates that we mentioned. Did you know that the tectonic plates actually move by about 3 to 5 centimeters a year? So if you're hoping to travel to Europe from Australia one day, just wait a few million years and you might just get there.
Okay.
Perfect.
Wow.
I got time.
You got time.
I'm not going anywhere.
It's thought that the tectonic plates movement is caused by the convection currents of the mantle below. So what about earthquakes? So earthquakes, tectonic plates on the crust have boundaries around them, and these are faults. And the majority of the faults are where the majority of earthquakes are where the faults occur. Okay, so what happens? How does an earthquake happen? So earthquakes happen when tectonic plates slip past each other, because often the plates will be sitting next to each other. They may kind of be wedged up against each other. They may even be in the process of kind of slipping, but they get stuck. And what happens is that when the plates actually eventually slip past each other, any energy that has been stored by, the plates holding onto each other gets released. Yes. And this radiates outwards from the fault in the form of seismic waves. And if you can imagine ripples in a pond, that's how it happens. And that's why we feel so much shaking. The waves shake the earth as they move through, and they're actually measured by seismographs. Now, before I go into that, the area where the earthquake starts is called the hypocenter, but the location directly above that is called the epicenter. So everybody's heard about the epicenter.
Epicenter, yeah.
And the largest main quake, the first one that you feel, the really big shock one, is called the main shock, and the aftershocks follow, and the aftershocks are usually smaller. Now, if you get another big main shock, that's going to be the main shock, and the other one was just kind of like a little shock. So there you go. They reclassify. Yeah,
Warm up.
Whoa,
that's it. And aftershocks can be quite big. I've been in New Zealand where, say you get something like a 6.1 or something, and then they'll have a 5.5. The 5.5 still feels quite big, so it's still rattling. I've had it where we've been, we had the 6.1. You're like, wow, that was, you feel that. You go for a walk afterwards, a few hours later, and you see the bushes shaking and stuff. You go, okay, we're still shaking. So it's still going.
Now, New Zealand had devastating earthquakes.
They have, yes.
Not Christchurch?
Yes, Christchurch was the one, the really big one, only not too long ago, a few years ago. Wellington has had really big ones. Actually, where my husband's parents live in Wellington, so they're on up in the hills, and half of their backyard is kind of slipped away from one of the earthquakes.
Wow.
So it's still fine. The rest of the area they live on is quite strong, but that bit was a bit loose and kind of just fell down.
Shook away,
yeah.
I don't know if you know the answers, but is there a major fault line under New Zealand or nearby?
Yeah, so they sit on their. I think they're sitting on a in the middle of a tectonic plate, so that's why they've got so much geological activity. They've got volcanoes, they've got the hot springs, they've got the earthquakes, and so it's very geologically active in New Zealand.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Which is what makes it such a beautiful place as well. If you think about all the island places where there's volcanoes, so Hawaii, like that, it's all volcanically active. So even Sicily, Italy, they've got beautiful countryside. It's all volcanic, So it does create the one in Spain at the moment that's happening. It's actually created a new landmass.
I was about to say
The volcano, yeah. Anyway,
That's really fascinating.
It's very interesting stuff. So the seismic waves are measured by seismographs, and they're they create a graph called a seismogram, and this actually measures the magnitude of the earthquakes. So if you see a seismograph, you'll see little waves being measured. So it kind of like looks like, so you could have a ball or a pin on top of a platform, and the base will stay still, but either the needle or the ball will move as the earth shakes. And the larger the wave, the stronger magnitude of the earthquake. If you get little ones, they're kind of small earthquakes. So you can see the movement of the earth. And there are actually two kinds of seismic waves. There's P waves and S waves. They can actually help to tell where an earthquake originates. The P waves are fast traveling waves and will shake the ground first, and then the S waves are slower and will follow the P waves. The time between the P wave and the S wave can actually be measured, and then the distance from the location where the earthquake happened can be calculated. However, the direction can't be calculated by one seismograph. You can actually use triangulation though. So if you have a few seismographs in different locations and they measure the same earthquake, you can actually use the radius of each one, and where the radius kind of intersects, you can find the epicenter. So that's how they do that. So Australia, now going back to specifically this Melbourne earthquake, Australia itself doesn't actually sit on a tectonic fault, say like New Zealand, Hawaii, or the countries like we know of Japan, there's that whole plate there. In fact, it sits on a plate called the Indo-Australian plate, and it contains mostly Australia and ocean, and we're like not in the middle, but it doesn't go through Australia. So why are we still feeling these quakes? So the earthquake in Melbourne actually occurred because there was a build-up of energy in the crust, which was released due to a rupture of a weak zone. So there was actually a fault in the crust. So not the plate, but the crust itself.
Oh, right.
So that can still happen and still cause quakes. Yes. So that was quite interesting to learn, because when you think, I think a lot of us, I actually heard a lot of people, and even at work while they were, chatting online the next day, they were like, well, but we're not on a fault line. Why are we getting quakes? Well, that's the reason why. You can still have faults in the crust, not just be sitting on a tectonic fault and have an earthquake. Yeah. So I guess to Melburnians, the earthquakes feel kind of like far apart, and we'd probably say it's quite rare to have an earthquake here. But they are kind of happening on a regular basis. According to records that have been kept, there's been a magnitude 6 or higher around every 6 to 10 years. And so Australia is still quite seismically active, and I do remember a couple of other smaller earthquakes. I feel like this was the bigger one.
We've had tremors before.
We've had tremors,
little shakes. Nothing as big as this. We've had
nothing
as
big as this, and in fact, this was the largest one recorded in Victoria ever. And there have been other quakes around magnitude 5 in 1996 from Mount Borbor, originating in Mount Borbor, and another one 2012 in Maui. So, we still get the quakes here, and this may not be the last one. So now that we know about it, there you go. So they still don't know a lot about why they happen here in Melbourne, because there's not a lot of funding put into the research, but at least they do know that this one was just caused by a little bit of a fault in the crust. So there you go. Hope I wasn't too earth-shattering.
To be honest, every time you say crust, I was thinking of pizza. So,
me too, to be honest.
Or
the crust on top of a cake after you cook
it.
Pavlova.
That was good. That actually answered a lot of the questions I was going to ask you, because what was responsible if we're not on a fault line and things like that. But I didn't know about stored energy in the crust that's getting released. That's a really interesting source for earthquakes. I actually didn't know that was a thing, so that was really good. Some new knowledge today.
There you go.
Let's Science is brought to you by StarQuest Media and is a fortnightly podcast that brings you the scientific wonders of our universe from a distinctly Catholic point of view. For more from Caroline, Lindsay, and friends, listen to the StarQuest show, Catholics of Oz. Find links from today's show at sqpn.com/science and find the Catholics of Oz at sqpn.com/Oz. Be sure to follow the show in Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you can find podcasts, or on the SQPN YouTube channel. The generous donations of our patrons at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue Let's Science and all the shows at StarQuest, which makes our nonprofit mission possible. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. Join us next time for more scientific wonders, and thank you for listening to Let's Science on StarQuest.